Guthrie, and this is the Long Letter Podcast. I think we're episode 17. I probably should have looked that up before we got started. And we are continuing the discussion on Grace Can Lead Us Home, a Christian call to end homelessness. And I have two guests today, Dr. Lily Lowe and Gillian Davis, to share their experiences working on the topic of substance use and overdose. And so we're going to go through, I'm going to share parts of the chapter, and y'all are going to share your experience working in this field. And anyways, yeah, that's kind of the gist of how we start here. So how are you guys doing this evening?
Very well.
Well, thank you.
There we go. Okay. Well, he starts out this, well, actually, let me stop real quick. Lily, why don't you kind of share what you do here at the clinic?
You know, I didn't even realize I had a title until I read that article in the Seattle Times. So I am the supervising physician at Gather Med's first clinic, and I'm also the medical director at Northwest Pediatric Center.
And so you just have tons of free time, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things that we started 3 years ago, and just as, you know, those are the days when we were like one patient a week. We were so excited. We didn't know if we'd ever get to 2 patients a week. And now we've got like 10 to 15 a night. So, it's sad, but it's good.
Yeah, there's a need that's being met there. And Gillian, what do you do here at the Meds First Clinic?
I'm one of the nurses who just meets people as they come in and works with the whole team.
Okay.
Part of the team.
Yeah. We do have a lot of moving pieces here, a lot of team members from all different walks of life, backgrounds, everything. And okay. So he starts out this chapter talking about Jamil, who was the first person that he ever knew to die of a drug overdose. And he works at the center, and Jamil is somebody that was part of that community who ends up dying of overdose, and they don't actually realize it. He ends up being dead on the street. They thought he was just sleeping before they realize it. And he kind of goes through what he calls his instinctive responses of anger and disappointment in Jamil, frustration about drugs, and he kind of has, I think, what he would say is like a naive response to addiction and the consequences of it. And he kind of ties that into his Christian faith, where he says, "We have for a century built our Christian philosophy of addiction on theological ideas that corner us into moralizing drugs and the people who use them to such an extent that the only available response is judgment and punishment." And I think that's the common response. Like, I feel it, Christian or not, like we're kind of geared toward this sort of way of looking at it. And he talks more as he exists in this sphere and in this work of having to broaden his view of these things, and about not being like this judgmental. And he says, effectively and compassionately addressing substance use and addiction as experienced by our unhoused neighbors requires that we root our interventions in truth rather than faulty myths. And so I think what he's trying to capture is the complexity of addiction and how people respond to trauma. We'll get into the homeless part of it, because the entire book's about housing. It's about homelessness. And these are the risk factors that come into play. And so, I mean, did either of you have sort of that, what we'll call that mindset of judgment and whatever earlier on? Did you come to see it differently? Like, does your work change the way that you view how you interact with this, people dealing with substance use disorder?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, not here at this work, but even prior to starting here at Meds First, I think I did have that naive response, that a lot of people share, which I think is a totally inappropriate response, which is if they just pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and got serious about it, they could quit. They just need to hit rock bottom and they would quit. And I had a friend whose family member was suffering from addiction, and they hit rock bottom I don't know how many times, and I kept thinking they can't hit any lower
like there's
than
no,
that.
there's
no bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no bottom. I mean, it's infinite. Yeah, exactly. And And then I realized that that's a really naive assumption, that if people just, that's why it's called an addiction. You're addicted because that means that you can't help yourself, medically. That's like saying, well, you're diabetic. Well, why are your blood sugar all screwed up? It's your fault that
Like
your
you
blood
could
sugar's screwed up.
will yourself.
Yeah, like you can will yourself to do this. Well, if you could will yourself, you wouldn't be addicted. So that was kind of an aha moment several years ago. So then when the opportunity came up to start a clinic like this, I think I already had it in my head that that's not the answer, to tell people to just suck it up and hit rock bottom, and then we'll help you up.
It'll help you, yeah.
Yeah.
And Jillian, did you have experience like seeing like shifting viewpoint on this at some point?
Well, I remember back in the 80s, I was an HIV nurse. Well, I was trained as a hospice nurse. So I had been trained to do, end of life care. And then right after I moved to the States is when the AIDS epidemic happened. And I was a fairly new nurse, and I knew how to take care of people who are dying, take care of symptoms and everything. And it was all nice gay men, right? Right. Remember the beginning of
Right.
it?
There's a lot of fear around what this was and how you could get it. And
Well, that aside, all of our first patients for a couple of years were all gay men, pretty much. And then we got the bad people with HIV. We got drug addicts and prostitutes. And so there were like the good people with HIV, and then there was the bad people. And so it was like, oh, this is really, that was how it was presented,
Mm-hmm.
and people were different to take care of. And then I realized, oh, then I need to learn more about being a drug addict. So I actually went and worked down at Hooper Detox in downtown Portland and learned how to detox people so I could learn about what it was, and that so I wouldn't be scared of addicts, because I felt like I was scared of addicts. I wasn't scared of gay men, right? So it was like a wake-up call. It was like, oh, so we have these good people, and then we have these bad people. And that very much how it was talked about in those days, if you remember it.
Yeah. And we have these
So it's like-
biases we bring into our care.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And then we had to learn, as nurses, we had to learn, how do you do pain control with addicts? Totally different. We had all these other things to learn. So I definitely feel like that was a wake-up call for me. It was like, oh, we can't treat some people bad and some people good. Like I had to expand my mind to say, everyone's got this disease and everyone needs care. We just need to learn more to do better care, basically.
Right. And I've talked about that on the podcast before with other guests, that proximity effect, like, developing an empathetic response, understanding the complexities of the situation. They're not an object or a person, and seeing that close up does change. You think if I remember when this is slightly different, but it's on mental health. Being in high school, and there's this girl that I was friends with who, I remember one day, just like, she's usually like this really happy, almost like manic, if you will, happiness, and then like not long later, a few periods later, I'd see her and she'd just be crying. And at the time, I had no idea what was going on. I just thought she had very extreme, and as an adult later, I'm thinking back and I'm like, I bet you she was struggling with undiagnosed bipolar disorder, that proximity to it though made me see it in a different light than just some, thing that somebody has over here.
Yeah, you have to know people, get to know their stories. Once that becomes real to you, they're no longer a diagnosis or an object. I mean, they're a human being, a person. And then that's when you learn truly how to help people.
Right. And it's a more holistic approach to it. And yeah, anyway, so like, yeah, if you don't know, then this is foreign, and it's easy to carry our biases or our, stigmas into that. And we're people, we're growing, we're learning. So it's like the more interaction that I've had, the more I've realized, okay, your first time around somebody with like schizoaffective disorder can be very unnerving because they weird behavior. The more you see it though, the more you're like, I understand what this is. I understand a little bit how to operate with this, And so, yeah, he he kind of touches on that stigma about homelessness and substance use. And, I'm a technical person, and in my field, we have this community called Slashdot. They had kind of a refrain when it came up to research or different things like that, which is correlation is not causation. And, it gets thrown around all the time. But what he's trying to address here is like this chicken and egg problem. What came first, homelessness or substance use? And he points out that, statistically, it's not a clear cut, like this person, started their, abusing drugs and then they ended up homeless. Oftentimes, it could be the other way around. It's a coping mechanism for being homeless. And until we actually know somebody's situation, even then, your treatment is the same, right? Well, we figured out which part came first, and therefore that's going to change the way that we address it. But he quotes some authors in their book, In the Midst of Plenty, Homelessness and What We Do About It, by Mary Beth Shin and Jill Kaduri. He quotes them as saying, college students have high rates of substance use, as with homeless adults. The favored substance is alcohol. But observers rarely claim that young people become college students because of their substance use. And he's just pointing out the absurdity of this correlation is not causation sort of thing.
Right.
And the game is changing too. I mean, from when I was a kid and when I was college age, I would say the field has changed dramatically in the past, even like 5 years or since the clinics opened even.
In the past 2 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the drugs that are being dealt with, the issue, like I think even now, alcohol among college students is actually dropping. But then they're also dealing with things like everything being laced with fentanyl, which, somebody said something along the lines of, there used to be a time you can learn from your mistakes, not die from them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, everything, it's a changing field. And I think with that, there's things that you're always going to have to review how you're working with this. And so he kind of focuses on this crisis of overdoses, which are very felt right now in our own community, but across the U.S. And they come on the heels of the opioid epidemic, where doctors were prescribing this like candy, without controls, necessarily or whatever. And then when that was realized, certain things were put in place, these things were revoked. But then you have a whole population of people that are now addicted to what was a legal prescription, and they just flood the illegal market looking for something to fill that that addiction. And I think that's something that, one, that we have to be mindful of, but two, to also recognize that the face of these people isn't always some sort of person that you would think is going to be, you look at somebody, oh, well, they're obviously an addict, right? Like, we can do that. That's easy to do. A lot of these people are people that had some sort of injury, chronic pain or something they were dealing with that you wouldn't have guessed. Accountants, lawyers, whatever, you name it. It's not specific to a particular segment of people. And so, now I didn't look this up, but I know we have talked about it as elders and we've talked about it in our community, but I don't know if we're at peak opioid epidemic yet. Like, would you, I don't
think we are.
Yeah.
Does anybody know yet? We don't know.
I mean, the numbers have to start changing, and they're not changing the right way as far as I understand it. And then you take that situation, you throw fentanyl in it, and now the game's changed. The rules have changed. The way you treat, or, I can't think of the word, but, the process for dealing with that changes. And so, yeah, he gets into these synthetic opioids, which is what fentanyl is. And he mentions carfentanil, which is like 100 times more addictive than fentanyl. So we already have fentanyl, which is just destroying things. And then you have one that's even worse that they're seeing. And so, Lily, I'll ask you, like, fentanyl has a medical use. It's been around for a while.
Yeah,
so,
for anesthesia. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've had this, and I'm sounds like cheap, easy to make. You can make it synthetically. And so people cut their drugs with this to sell more drugs. Or,
I think I read the other day it's 80 cents to make a little fentanyl. That's it.
Just
80 cents to produce fentanyl. And it's like, okay, then you just start putting that into stuff, and then you put it into meth, and people get addicted to the fentanyl, not the meth.
right.
And they don't realize that the reason they're so sick is because of the fentanyl that got put into what they thought was straight up meth.
Right. And it's those drugs outside of the opioid family. It's all, Lisa, I've heard that we've got, people that just smoke marijuana that are testing, for they have fentanyl in their system.
Maria Petty and her son, who died of what he thought was marijuana, and it was laced with fentanyl.
Right.
I mean, we've had clients who weren't actively using opioids, and they were on Suboxone, and then whatever reason they were taking something else like meth, and then next thing you know, they were dead from an accidental fentanyl overdose. When they got towards the end of their Suboxone prescription, if it run out or they were a day late or something, they're not protected anymore. And then, very unexpected.
Yeah. And what's so you mentioned Suboxone. We also have, what's the
Sublocade.
Sublocade. These are drugs that help reduce the effectiveness of opioid, like in the receptors or something like that?
It binds the receptors a lot more. It's more magnetic to the receptors than any of the other opioids out there in the market. So the buprenorphine binds to those receptors selectively and kicks off any other opioid that might be on there right now. So that's why people who are actively using like heroin or fentanyl, they don't want to take the buprenorphine right away because it'll put them into horrifically bad withdrawal right away when it kicks off the fentanyl or whatever out of the opioids. So the idea is you load people up with buprenorphine, it occupies all of their opioid receptors so they don't get the withdrawal symptoms from not having those opioid receptors activated, but they don't get high from it because there's a ceiling effect. You can't take more buprenorphine and get more high, basically. And it's only a 60% agonist, a partial agonist for those opioid receptors, not 100% agonist like methadone or heroin or anything. So you get you get the blocking effect of it in terms of preventing withdrawal, but you don't get the high and the euphoria that a full agonist would have.
And there's a whole regimen for working that out with somebody. And, I read the Seattle Times article on it recently. And you were talking about the difficulty of working on these regimens. So you have somebody that's dealing with substance use, and that comes with its own sort of difficulties right off the bat. They're also typically homeless or unhoused or not in a stable housing situation. And then you have this regimen of what it takes to help get them hopefully, clean. And it's complicated. And do you struggle with that constant, like, you have to get really creative about, that's what I got out of the Seattle Times, like the creativity of like, how do we do this?
I think we have 4 different regimens now for starting people on Suboxone if they're on fentanyl. There's macro dosing, hit them hard, get them into precipitated withdrawal by giving them Narcan, and then load them up with Suboxone right away. Horrifically bad withdrawal for about 45 minutes, but then it's better than, some other people doing it a micro dosing way. They may go through withdrawal for 3 or 4 days, or, there's just multiple
less
regimens.
severity over a longer period of time.
So it's kind of a trade-off, and everybody is individualized. You really have to, we've had people say, I don't care, just hit me with the Narcan, and I'll take an hour of feeling horrifically bad if I can get off the fentanyl. And other people are like, I don't want to feel sick that long. So can we do it really slowly? And there's a method called the Bernese method where they stay on their opioid and then they take a small amount of buprenorphine and gradually increase it. And over time, it saturates their opioid receptors. So then they stop the drug use 5 to 7 days into it. And by then, all their opioid receptors are saturated with buprenorphine. And that's a much slower process. There's other methods where you start the buprenorphine when you're off of the opioid, go into withdrawal, and then you start the buprenorphine slowly and build it up. Those are the people that are complaining of being in withdrawal for several days on a low-grade level. So everybody's different. Their tolerance level is different, and their withdrawal symptoms are different. Some people can deal with it. Other people, the restlessness just drives them crazy, the agitation, the nausea, body aches, all of that stuff. They just can't tolerate that. So we're trying to tailor it to each individual what we do and
Right.
talk with them through it, make an informed decision with them. Like, what do you think would work well for you?
And everybody's heard different stories. So it's a question of how do we get people to have that conversation that Lily was just describing? It's like people have heard so many stories of things which have gone well for people or not so well. And so how do we gain the trust for people to even come and talk to us? That's really
and that's the high bar to hurdle, isn't it? Like
that's really tricky.
there's an oddity to the fact that they are currently in addiction, right? But
Yeah.
they also want to have a trust to hand you the safety of their care, which requires more than just herding them in through a program and these things. You have to. There's a counseling part of it, I guess. So.
And it really needs
Yeah.
to be tailored to the individual, what they can tolerate, what they're willing to tolerate, and how motivated they are. I think so. You can't just say one size fits all in this, and you really need to have that discussion with each person. Like, what do you think would work for you? These are all the different ways we can do it. What do you think would work for you?
And so I would imagine you see that in the medical field, not related to drug addiction, right? Like treatments for various different things, right?
Yeah.
There's more than one way to approach it. There's a person's history, there's their risk factors. Like, while I can't put you on this because I think that would probably make this other issue worse, but we can do this,
Right.
there's that creativity in trying to navigate multiple, issues all at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the for the average patient that you see, do they want this? Do they struggle with wanting it? Do they vacillate back and forth? Like what's the state of people that you're working with when they're coming into the clinic trying to get help? I mean,
let's start with Gillian, who goes actually to the encampment and on our syringe exchange program. And so she actually sees people who are not here at the clinic yet.
Yeah, that's
So just so listeners know, Gather has the HRV harm reduction vehicle that can go out on site. It usually contains, it's an old ambulance, right? That's been, and there's usually several staff that serve different areas there.
Yeah.
We have nurses that go out. We have food. We have wound care, right? Like things like that. That's what you do, Gillian.
and we have needle exchange,
Needle
clean
exchange.
needles.
Yeah. Okay. So you go out. What's your what would you say is like your normal interaction with people?
Well, it's in a team of people, and we go out to the same place regularly. So we see people over time, and some people are not. They really like the food and they really want a blanket or something, but they may or may not be using drugs. We don't know. So it's a question of we give them what they want at the time and develop a relationship with them. And a lot of conversations are about simple things. They find out there's a nurse there. They're like, oh, I've got a cough or I've got a scab or I've got a blister or something. So we do some kind of first aid things. And then during those conversations, we can bring up other conversation about, oh, did you know we've actually got a clinic? And people will listen, but, oh, I don't want to do that. Or that's great. You're really glad you've got one. I'll tell someone else.
Right.
So there's quite a few people that we've met that have started out pretty ambivalent, but have got to know several of us going out there for different things. Maybe people are really interested in getting off the street. So they develop a relationship with someone who's helping them with that. And then as that conversation kind of moves and maybe they need help with a legal thing or getting a ID card or something like that, the conversation develops to addiction. And they didn't know that we actually had a clinic as well. So over time, that it's really about building the relationships, I think. And we've had quite a few people who have had some nasty wound type things who are now coming in and on our Suboxone. So it's a gaining trust, I think, with
Yeah,
people.
it's a
And
process.
showing up for them, showing up next week with some bandages, showing up the next week with
And
a
remembering
cold
their
pack,
story and who they are.
remembering them. Oh, you need wool socks. Okay, wool socks. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's just part of I feel like I couldn't do that on my own as a nurse. If I just walked out there on my own as a nurse, it wouldn't work.
Yeah, they wouldn't trust you.
They wouldn't trust me but I go out there with people they already have trust with. And then people say, oh no, she's actually okay. She may be a nurse, but not like those mean nurses kind of thing. So some people have had very bad experiences with medical professionals, being treated rudely and dismissively. So
building that trust.
So we don't normally go out in scrubs with little white jackets and stuff like that. It's like, just go out like normal people. So I think that it's a team approach. I don't think we could do as well in the clinic if we didn't have that whole team
it's
out there in the community.
And it's the myriad of services that the team brings, not just one thing to shoehorn somebody into. It's and how, and we're getting off book, but that's okay because that's what this is about. How important is the coercion, uncoercion part of it? Like, I know that one of the struggles people have with harm reduction is that you don't just like go take them and make it happen, you know? But I think you're kind of indicating that that's the experience that they've had in other programs. And
it doesn't appear to work. Yeah.
No, it doesn't work. Yeah, they definitely don't trust medical people at all. So for them to build a rapport with Gillian, then who can say, hey, if you go to this clinic, my friends are working there and they will help you. Because once people get here, I mean, they want to be here. They want to get, nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, oh, I can't wait to get my next hit of opioid. I mean, they're usually thinking, I wish I didn't have to get my next hit of opioid. I really would love to be off of this. Nobody, I think, grows up wanting to be addicted to anything, so building that trust, that relationship is how you get your foot in the door. And then we just continue just to meet people where they're at. I mean, getting back to the book, harm reduction, it talks about that. The goals of that is autonomy and safety, and respecting people's choices. And that's true for, that's the new catchphrase in medicine is respecting people's choices and making decisions with them. That's what we're doing now in healthcare, just general healthcare is you can't have that paternalistic, Marcus Welby approach and you're just going to do this and I'm going to prescribe this and you're going to do this. No questions asked. Now these are the options. What do you think would work for you? And then we talk about it together. So that's the same thing that this is. It's basically, we realize that you have a choice. You don't have to be here. You clearly want help because you're here. What do you think you can, what's your goal? One thing we always ask them the first time they come is, what is your goal in this? And some people will tell you, I still want to keep using, but I don't want to use as much. Other people will say, well, my drug dealer got arrested and I'm afraid I'll go into withdrawal. So I want something that's safer for me to use. We have other people saying, I've been hooked on Kratom and I think it's going to become illegal pretty soon. And I'm really scared and I want to go on something safer than that. And other people just say, I'm just tired of being on opioids and I want to get off. So, there's a myriad of reasons why people will want to be on medication-assisted treatment for this. So we just have to meet them where they're at. And if somebody says, I want to keep using fentanyl, but I want to use less, okay, that's one tiny step closer to being off fentanyl. Yeah. It's respecting their choices and giving them that autonomy, but still keeping them safe.
Yeah. And that safety is not just their safety, but community safety as well. And I think, in the book, he talks a lot about the cooperative nature of harm reduction in the sense that people are more likely to see success in their treatment if they are a part of developing that treatment and that back and forth. So, and it's dumb to have to say this, but everybody that works here the goal would be nobody lost in addiction.
Right.
Okay. Now, since that goal is not necessarily attainable on our own end, right? On the end of the people that desire that, what's the next step we do? And that is, okay, what's one step better to a better situation for this person? And continue that, like hoping that somebody might be like, well, I just want to reduce my use of this. I don't want to completely be off of it. but maybe in a year they're ready to be off of it, and they're still alive to be able to do that.
That's the point. Keep them alive until they can wake up one day and decide, I really don't want to do this anymore, and then take that step, But if they're dead, they can't make that choice. So that is part of the goal of harm reduction, is safety. First and foremost is safety.
And another thing is, I think the way we set up the clinic, which is people can just walk in, no appointments, we can maybe catch people with that time when they say get released from jail. They go, oh, I'll go over there. Maybe I can get on Suboxone. It catch them at that moment. If we're not there, they may just go out and use again. We've lost that opportunity. So being
ready when they're ready.
Ready and super flexible and willing to stay late, and that, I think, is harm reduction. I mean, it's like, oh, sorry, we close at 5:00. That's stopping things be possible. And the other thing I think about harm reduction, which I think is difficult for some people to understand, is with harm reduction, you never know. It's not very quantifiable. You can't say, oh, I prevented this many this or that many that, right? It's because you never know what you've prevented.
Right.
You can't go out and say, oh, today I prevented 18 of this and 1 of that. You're never going to know what you prevent, but the system is preventing things in a big, slightly unknown way.
Yeah, well,
and that's why people argue about it, because they're like, well, give me the facts. It's like, it isn't a facts-based thing specifically. It's a system that people are involved in that they can be part of and make decisions over time.
Right. And I think
it's really different.
There's the abstract, which is what you're talking about. Like, if I do this, there's maybe 10 other directions I could have gone if I hadn't acted in this way or whatever. We can't see what other realities exist if somebody made a different decision. But as the article in Seattle Times pointed out, statistically, though, we can look at like, okay, what does this model look like? And what outcomes are we seeing? And that one guy had determined 68%.
Caleb Bantagreen, and we were part of the research project with UW. And that was our first year of looking at the research and what kind of mortality could we prevent. 68%.
68% reduction in mortality.
Yeah, with this approach, as opposed to the traditional, you have to have an appointment and this kind of stuff. Yeah.
I mean, that's mind-boggling. Like, statistically, in statistics, you don't see numbers like 68%. You see, yeah, like, and you're like, well, that's success, with 68%. And I the more cynical, jaded side of me says sometimes that that's what people have a problem with harm reduction. And I know that sounds mean, but the idea that, well, those people should have died, or that those, you're just keeping people alive
who deserve to die.
To die. Yeah. But that's a number. So like you're saying, yes, we can't tell with, any certainty. We can't foresee what it would look like if other choices had been made. But statistically, we can look at certain things in these programs, and 68% reduction in mortality. I mean, that's a number. That's more people alive today that hadn't been.
And critics of harm reduction, like our syringe exchange, people think, oh, if you give somebody a syringe, they're suddenly going to become a drug addict. I don't know anybody who you handed them a syringe and they decided, I'm going to go start shooting up.
Most people don't even like syringes.
No, they don't. So the idea of harm reduction.
For a phlebotomist, I do not want to nurse to it. No offense, Gillian.
But I mean, the harm reduction point of it is, you're going to reuse that dirty needle. I know you are, and you have a higher chance of getting an abscess, HIV, hepatitis. Give me that dirty needle. I'll give you a clean needle, so that the next time you use it, you've reduced your chance of getting hepatitis, HIV, abscesses, endocarditis, all this other stuff.
And that reduction there is a reduction in our community of one person not walking around with hepatitis C.
Exactly. Or throwing the needle on the ground and leaving it out. They give them to us.
We give them to collect them and return them.
It does, because it's a one-for-one thing, essentially. I mean, we give them sharps containers, so they're not throwing them on the street. Put them in the sharps container, and we'll exchange 1 for 1, because you're using it anyway, but let us help you use it safer so that you can maybe one day make a decision of, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right. And I think people think this is like some sort of solution. It's a mitigation.
No, the
idea is just to let's improve the general safety of our population for them, for everybody, in this thing. And that's, I think that's one of the frustrations I have about critics to needle exchange. And I get the sort of aversion to a needle exchange program, except like, well, because I was there when we decided to do the program. I'm elder at Gather. We discussed it. And my initial response was like, no way in hell. Like, but then doing the research, looking into it, one of the first things that I always think about when it comes to people that you're in opposition with, or even myself when I'm opposed to something, is they tell you in debate, the first step is to word your opponent's position in a way that they would agree with it when you engage. And it's been, I don't know, a while now, and I'm still not hearing from opponents the needle exchange being expressed the way that it actually is practiced. They've got a caricature of it, which if you were listening to them, you're thinking that there's some HRV vehicle driving down the road throwing needles out the window like candy, in a parade. And that's not what it is at all.
No.
It's a place that people who use drugs can come to get safe equipment, to meet other people, to learn things. Like people come and have conversations with us and learn about all kinds of things. And
There's a lot of
it's a way-
start getting hepatitis C testing on them, HIV
we do.
testing.
Yeah, we offer all kinds of things.
And we have a opioid or awareness,
Overdose awareness.
overdose, awareness
Coming
event coming up. And in that, they line people up to get treatment for hepatitis C,
Yeah.
which like some
Yeah.
people, many people probably don't know.
Yeah.
You can be treated for hepatitis C.
Yeah. But people find out about those kind of things by we're coming up and knowing that we know that they're drug addicts, or else they wouldn't be coming up. And we have information for them and willing to help them.
It's a bridge.
So it's a complete bridge. It's a complete bridge.
And when they're ready, then like the idea is we're ready, ready to get them through that.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things we say is, hey, do you know we have a Suboxone clinic? I didn't know that. Or I did know that. And and you can just give them a little bit of information. Like, when you're ready to learn more, come and tell us, and they're like, okay. And you can see people tack that information away.
Right.
And maybe they won't use it, but maybe they'll tell someone else.
I mean, that's really no different. I mean,
Education.
the critics who say, well, you're not proselytizing enough on that HRV, I mean, that's like saying, okay, I'm going to beat somebody over the head with a Bible and that'll make them become a Christian.
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't work that way.
There's none of that.
No, you have to develop that rapport and the right to speak into their life, first of all. And that's what this is. I mean, it's developing that rapport and that relationship where they trust you enough for you to say, hey, did you know we actually can test you for hepatitis C? And hey, are you ever interested in maybe trying to get off of that fentanyl? But you can't start off, you can't lead with that, because you're like, no, you're just like every other medical professional out there.
Right.
And you're treating them like crap. And yeah.
But also people are sometimes surprised that we're willing to help with a simple thing like, some people get really bad skin during the winters and stuff. It's like, we'll just give them bandages or whatever they need. And they're kind of so glad that someone would do that. That's kind of surprised.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, because
And then you suddenly
realize
realize,
you help you need if you do what we want, which is
Exactly.
get
right.
clean, versus building that relationship. And yeah, like on this side of things, the want is that you eventually decide, sobriety, getting clean would be what you want. But like proselytizing, the whole beating somebody over the head sort of thing, that's not an inner desire to want to embrace that thing or do that thing. And that's what's needed, not just for them to make the choice, but also for them to sustain the hard work it's going to be to get, off of these drugs or whatever. So it's that cooperation in their own care that eventually, hopefully, will lead to them seeing better outcomes and making better choices and so on. But yeah, you can.
Also, people who come get Suboxone one time, try it for a few days, and then do a relapse, even if it takes them another 6 months to come back another time, they've already had that first experience. And as long as we're always open and willing to have them back, which we always are delighted when people come back, then that builds, the experience of getting clean once apparently makes it easier to do it the second and the third time and the fourth time and the fifth time, because you never know which time is going to be
Right.
the time that they're going to be able to maintain that.
And that's
longer.
the
And that's-
insanity in some of this is
Yeah.
that, like, I've talked to Brooke, I've talked to many others that were in addiction, and the recurring theme was, like, I think it takes on average 6 attempts
Yeah.
before somebody, like, it kicks, right? So if your approach is get clean or else, then what do you do for the next 5 times? Like,
Exactly.
why not? Why go through this whole long thing when you can just shortcut it and just continually try to get people on a track to get their life in order, you know? And that safety in the clinic, the safety to know that they can come in. There isn't shame involved in it. There isn't judgment. There isn't. It's the only thing is the desire to help that person improve where they're at.
Yeah.
And some people are coming in because their friends are dying of overdoses. I mean, some people come in because they're scared. You know, something happens that terrifies them, and they come in and they just say that. You know,
and it is. I mean,
that
I know
must be so scary.
With the overdoses that we've had just locally in our own county, I know that many of our staff are struggling with the loss of people that they knew, people that they were trying, people that they know, people that they used with, people that, you know, whatever, that are, you know, they desire good things for them and they're losing them. And I can tell a day that's happened. I don't even have to go look up a news report or whatever, because you can see it on their faces. That loss is a real loss because they cared about the people that were lost to addiction.
Yeah. I mean, their goal for all of us, I mean, our hope is that we could get everybody off of opioids and free from even Suboxone, that they're not on anything and they're living a happy, fruitful, joyful life. But that is, you know, this side of heaven, I don't think that's attainable.
Well, it's not in our control.
That's not in our control because there's another person involved who has to make a choice. And just like God respects us for our autonomy, gives us those choices, we need to respect the other people's choices as well. This is how they choose to live their life right now.
And that's where the creativity comes in the treatment, which is, okay, how can we maybe, push that ball forward and respect their autonomy to where someday they would want to choose that. Sorry, Julian.
No, I was just going to say that, wouldn't it be great if we could close down? I mean, that would be great. Right. The ultimate success would be, well, we're not needed. Just close down and think of something else to do. But then I was also going to say that I worked for a while at Lewis County Jail as a nurse. And I was completely confused about my job. I was like, there was all these people who have all these needs, and I was rushing around trying to help people, and people coming in there detoxing and whatever, all kinds of stuff. And while I was in there, the one thing I learned was that there was the drug court program. You know, there was actually a program in there that was actively helping people, working with them, because so much of it didn't seem to be helpful. Like even the medical part didn't seem to be very helpful. So that had a big effect on me. It's like I feel like why be a nurse in a jail if you don't have the resources to actually help your patients.
Yeah, you want the tools to be able to do stuff, and some of that stuff requires that creativity. Our systems don't really respond to creativity very well.
No,
but it's great here because the system is designed to be creative, to have all of the staff be creative, be who they are, and use their minds and everything to relate to people in a way that can work,
Yeah.
So people are coming up with new things all the time. It's great.
One of the things that it mentioned in the article, some of the critics were like, well, I had a relative who went and got Suboxone to the clinic and then went and sold it for fentanyl. Well, yeah, that happens. But we have kicked people out when we know that we're suspecting. I mean, our people are very in tune with what's going on in the street. And so we've got our radar up for people that we think might be diverting. And we have our case coordination meetings every quarter now to discuss people that we think might be diverting. How can we catch them? Or not to catch them to punish them, but to catch them, to confront them, to say, look, why are you doing this? Right. What do you really want? And we have kicked people out and said, even after we told you, we're going to check your drug test next week. And if we don't find any buprenorphine in it, you're going to be not able to come back here for at least 6 months. You understand that, right? Yeah. And then the next week they show up and they've altered their urine. It's like, well, sorry, we gave you the chance, and you can't come back until you've passed that parole period, basically, and demonstrated that you respect us enough to not lie to us.
Right. And
then
it's not a closed door. There's
No,
no
it's not.
process to come back,
Right.
but there is.
There's
It-
accountability. There is accountability
Yeah.
built in, and and the other thought is, well, if they're selling their Suboxone to somebody else out there is getting Suboxone, which is probably saving their life because they're not
Yes.
using fentanyl or they
'Cause
want to be off
We've definitely met people who come in having used Suboxone and tested it on their own
off the street, right?
off the street,
And that's why they came in.
and then come in. Like quite a few people.
Right. And that's the crazy
is
part
great.
about that market of selling Suboxone when anybody can literally come into the clinic and get it.
Get it right?
Yeah.
So it's not like the market exists because of some lack of accessibility or anything like that. It's more of like a market that exists, I'm guessing, as almost like an insurance that people will have so that if they can't get a hold of what they want, they have this
Right.
sort of thing. But
Well,
if
that-
it's abused, there's policies in place to
Right.
address that.
Mhm.
It's not a closed door. They can't, it's not like that we'll never see them again sort of thing. But at the same time, yeah, people are messy. The whole thing is a mess.
But how many people do we have that come in who've gotten Suboxone off the street and they want to get legitimately now?
Yes.
Great, they're
Yeah.
here. So somebody somewhere sold them Suboxone, but you
Yes.
know what? It got them into here to actually get clean.
Yeah.
So legitimately.
Yeah. No.
Mhm.
And that's what I thought was funny. The buying, selling, the market thing, it's anybody could walk into the clinic and get a prescription for it. So it's not exclusive. I think it's just a matter of the barrier that people want to go through to get it or whatever.
So also, I think some people know that they're on way too much fentanyl, right? They're getting out there on how much their tolerance is, and so they'll monitor themselves by withdrawing their fentanyl, using Suboxone for a bit, and then gradually they can get their fentanyl tolerance down to a safer level that they feel safer to then come off it completely.
Yeah. And
So it's a useful drug, like for that,
right. And that segues
even though we
into-
don't prescribe it like that.
Right. His next section, he talks about Barry. Barry is a guy that would break into the center and cook food and play solitaire. And he was, I can't remember how he, wholesome breaking and entering is how he words it. And Barry had a lifelong drug use issue, but he also had very strong boundaries in his drug use where he knew this was how much, no more sort of thing. He had lines, even though he was doing it in a very self-prescribed way. It wasn't like a wildfire type addiction. It was, something that he kind of managed on his own. And then he ended up dying because I think it was the heroin that he normally used, or crack cocaine, that was his thing, was cut with fentanyl. So even though he's somebody that self-regulated the amounts, he knew what his limits were. That fentanyl got into his supply and he died. Had no idea. And I know that, as a clinic, I'm here a few days a week just to be a presence and annoy everybody. And I feel like I do a really good job at that. But you can hear the frustration in the hallways sometimes of fentanyl is everywhere. It's in, every urine analysis. It's so pervasive now that it's just blanketing the area and people, and it makes it so much harder to treat. Like there's almost like a pining for, man, I wish we could just return to.
Oh yeah, if somebody comes in heroin, I'm like, yes, we got them.
We can help them.
We can help them.
It's a real
Yes.
beast to navigate, and it's a more difficult regimen. It's more addictive. It's more lethal. It's more everything that you don't want when you're trying to help somebody, and also trying to, if they're not going to get help, buy them time, and I feel like the crew here feels that some days where it feels just insurmountable.
Well, there's an urgency to it. I mean, we've got to keep this person alive
Yes.
for now until they can hopefully get to a safer place.
Yeah.
Also, people who are in active addiction like that don't take care of their other health problems. And so one of our goals, is have someone stable enough to go to the doctor to have other issues taken care of that are just being completely ignored, that are also life-threatening. So,
Yeah.
it's quite a few.
Or something
We've seen
that's
quite a few people like
life threatening, but can be if it's
Could
not
be.
treated.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it seems so unimportant to them at the time. Because
Yeah. I mean,
other
one
things
of
to
the
worry about.
things that chapter brings out is the relationship, between being unhoused and substance use. And honestly, in our experience, some of our patients do really, really well when they're housed. And as soon as they lose their housing, they relapse. And it's just the whole thing of Maslow's hierarchy. I mean, when you don't feel safe, first of all, your cortisol level shoots up. And so then all your physical health deteriorates. Your stuff gets stolen. You're constantly on your guard. You don't have a safe place to rest your head, put your belongings or anything. I mean, I think about myself. I have a pretty good life. If I worry about one thing, if I have one little tiny thing, I can't sleep at night. I can't imagine having a myriad of thoughts about
Right.
insecurity in every respect, whether it's food insecurity, transportation, and housing insecurity, all of that. And then worried about people, beating me, raping me, robbing me. That has your stress hormones so high. So they have lots of medical issues related to that cortisol just shooting up. I mean, in kids, we talk about ACEs, the adverse childhood, experiences. Adults are the same thing. I mean, they've got trauma that's happening to them all the time, and all those traumas add up and they beat up your body.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you're unhoused, part of the mechanism for coping is sometimes to go to drugs, because how else do you cope?
Right.
So some people will gravitate towards substance use, but I know that in our patients that we see here, the ones who've done really well, all of a sudden they lose their housing for whatever reason, they relapse. It's like so hard when they lose their housing.
And it's very hard to address an addiction issue if you do not have housing stability.
Exactly.
And yeah,
Or
we talked
even
about
if
that.
you're even if you're unhoused, but in a community. So the worst thing that can happen is that the community of unhoused people is dispersed. So those relationships are broken down. People are moved to another area where they don't have a clinic like this to come to if they're used to coming it, So I feel like some of the sweeps and everything of the unhoused community is more, it's so cruel.
Yeah, it's social,
But
it's social isolation.
It's considered, people talk about it like that's obviously what we've got to do, as if that's a reasonable behavior when it's completely cruel.
Well, and not to mention, like, logistically, and you guys should have been on the one where we talked about encampments and stuff. I get the struggles with it. I get all that stuff, but the from a logistical point of view, an encampment, while not ideal, and I don't know anybody that's pro encampment, it's at least one, a group of people using their self-agency to work this out. Two, we know where they are.
Yes.
Three, you can get them services. Four, like, there's a way of, just like we talk about, people don't want, a clinic like this here. The best option would be that there's just no need for it.
Exactly.
Just drives them, goes away. Same thing with encampments. You can go ahead and disperse them and use force and do this other stuff and just like kind of squeeze this balloon and put people out and isolate them further, which is one route to go. Or you can make their need unnecessary by addressing different types of transitional housing and so on. And yeah, it's hard to see that. It's hard to see how people respond to that. And I understand the frustrations with it. I mean, I don't think anybody, like I said, nobody's pro encampment. We've said that a million times. I'm just more of a, let's work with what we got and get this in the right direction. And, these encampments, homelessness, substance use, all that stuff, it's a product of our society. We're generating these things. The things that generate them are going to be a lot harder to correct and move than what it even took to get there. And I mean, we're decades behind on what started this stuff. Like a housing solution isn't going to be something that can be happen overnight or in a month or in a year or in 5 years. I mean, now it takes time to turn that ship around. So yeah, you guys know that. Anyway, so shifting gears, he talks about naloxone, or Narcan as the brand name is, and how key and pivotal it has been in this fight against opioid overdoses. And I know that we provide Narcan in training for anybody that wants to come in and get it. I know that it seems like years ago there was opposition from law enforcement, and now they've they're using it, or they have it, they're trained in it. Like it's really a no brainer. The pros are way outnumbered the cons, and the cons are, I guess, to certain people that some people live. It sounds terrible, but that's my more jaded side speaking, and that's what some people are like. Well, they should suffer the consequences of this thing and die.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about that. He says, in June 2017, during an especially deadly season of overdoses in the Midwest, a city council member in Ohio devised a shocking 3 strikes policy in an effort to reduce emergency response spending. EMTs would use naloxone to revive the same person only twice. The third time, they would be instructed to let the person die. Saving lives, at least these lives, was too hard on the budget.
Uh-oh.
And that's bad. That's my take on that. That's he talks about how many times do we try? How many times? And he relates this to Jesus talking about how many times do I need to
7 times
forgive?
that. Yeah.
And he says, the good things God gives to us, God expects us to give to others, including the forgiveness of debts. If we believe that God's grace gives us countless chances to repent and make a new choice, who are we to put a limit on the number of times we are willing to save a life? And that's the theological Christian aspect of it. And that's the point he's writing from here. But I mean, I don't know if it can be understated what a game changer naloxone is. I mean, it's even for like if a kid got it and did it, it's safe in so many ways that many of our other things aren't. I mean, it's safer than an EpiPen.
Yeah, I've used it for decades on newborns who were, born to moms who were on opioids, just to wake them up. Yeah. Brand new, newborns just born. We use Narcan all the time.
Also, it's like saying the medical system shouldn't treat people for lung cancer who've smoked or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to change that paradigm, like to suddenly say, well, so did you smoke? Sorry, we're just not going to give you a chest x-ray or whatever.
You deserve to die because you smoked and you took that chance.
Exactly. Lil, you did it.
Yeah.
We don't do that. We don't do that.
Yeah. And so many things to say and so many things not to say, I guess. We'll leave it
I was also going to say that when we go out with the HRV, we also have Narcan. I forgot to say that earlier.
Yeah. I love, Gillian, you're so nervous about doing this because you didn't know what to say. You've had no shortage of things to say.
Told you.
Great. I told you, all you have to do is answer questions and chime in. It's fun. So he talks about his friend Matthew. He does all this Narcan training and trained this person. And the person's not a drug user, but they had neighbors that were, and they immediately got the training. Then they went to their neighbors and said, hey, I've had training on this. If you guys are ever in trouble, come get me, and I will try to help. I'll do whatever I can. And it wasn't a judgmental thing. He actually cared about his neighbors, even though they were in active drug addiction. He cared about them, and he wanted them to know that, like, if they ever needed the help, he had been trained in this. And then the next day, they run up, they call him. He runs downstairs, uses the Narcan, saves a life. And I thought that was, I like that story just because it's got a happy ending, but also because it does express the sort of approach that we take. It's hard not to weigh in with judgment or whatever on people's decisions. And that's easy to do if you haven't been in proximity to the myriad of things going on in that person's brain while they're making these, what we consider poor decisions. I don't think it's a poor decision to care about somebody or to love on somebody or to be available to help somebody when they need it. And this just happened to work out here, where immediately he got to see the benefit of this training he had just taken. And so in the book, we've already talked about harm reduction, but this is where he gets into harm reduction. He says, we know that most accidents could be avoided if traffic laws were obeyed, yet require cars to have seatbelts and continually raise the standard of vehicle safety. We know that cigarettes cause devastating health problems, but rather than outlawing them, we restrict forms of advertising and tax them heavily to reduce their use, especially among young people who and have been quite successful in that. Why wouldn't we apply this tried and true methodology to drug policy? So I think what he's getting at is there are creative ways of enacting policies that can do the same thing as harm reduction, mitigate these circumstances. And, who do we help? Do we help just the people that we care about, or the people that just care about us? And he relates this, would we do well to remember the words of Paul? God proves his love for us, and that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. At no point does the question of whether a person deserves it enter the equation. And I think if we start playing the deserving it game, one, we're taking a God's eye view of something. We have to be very careful with that. But I also think that doesn't move the ball forward. We're not reducing a person's risk. We're not improving community health. We're not doing any of this stuff if we start limiting just to who deserved it. I mean, if the idea is to just reduce harm across the board, then harm reduction is something that you apply and you constantly, have as a service available, constantly working that issue. And there are the times that people will wake up one day and go, you know what, I think I'm done, or whatever. It makes for safer community. It makes for safer, sub-communities within that. That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that story about Matthew, I mean, when I read that the first time, it reminded me of, it's a Good Samaritan, and the guy asked, well, who's my neighbor? It's more important about you being a neighbor to somebody. And, that's what that is. He was a Good Samaritan, exactly like Jesus preached in that parable. I mean,
right.
We need to be the good neighbor. It's not for us to say, well, he's not my neighbor, I'm not going to help him.
Well, he talks about the transformational effect of being a good neighbor. He says one psychologist calls it a potent psychological intervention. So grace, treating people with respect and dignity who are denied that respect and dignity in most of the community. And sometimes they're very difficult people. Sometimes they've earned that title, but the constant applying of grace and toward that person is a type of intervention. That safety you were talking about, Gillian, that the people can come and get care and get the things that they need without judgment and without whatever. That is a type of intervention. That is a type of harm reduction and care for somebody. Grace works, and
but it's also a two-way thing, because I feel like I'm constantly learning. Those people are my teachers. Like, I'm learning to do my job better. And I feel like my whole nursing career has been having all these interesting people to learn from, and going way back to who do you learn things from? Really, it's your patients, if you're lucky enough to be a healthcare person.
Right. And I think that's maybe two different ways of approaching life, which is, last week we talked about this, universalizing our experience. We had this experience, and therefore why don't these other people have that? They don't get it, because I'm universalizing my experience to just assume that other people have had it like I do, or that they see things the way I do. There's the flip side of that, which I believe Dalen and Kat called cultural humility, which is this empathetic learning from other people's experiences. I mean, I'm hoping to get back to doing interviews again. One of the benefits of doing the interviews was hearing from somebody else's experience, their lived experience, and adding that to my own. I have not worked with, gay AIDS patients from the 80s. I was 3 or whatever,
Just remind me how old I am.
But that experience that you had, and even
it taught me so much. So I learned, it fundamentally changed me. It made me an activist, which of course some people think being an activist is a bad thing, but to me it like sparked my social justice teeth or whatever. Because it's like, why back then? Why didn't we care about all these people with HIV? Right? And why weren't we doing anything to get them drugs when we had all this? Remember that?
Yeah.
So to get anything going, you had to become an activist.
Because it was a moral judgment.
It was a moral judgment
people
based on about a disease, which is very similar to this.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. This is a disease, and yet there's this moral judgment and righteousness, which if I can use it in a tone like that,
we'll let you do that.
which gets in the way. I mean, it gets in the way of being effective, of
Right.
taking care of people. And it also dismisses people by saying these people can die. Those are the good ones and those are the bad ones.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? On all levels. And it's like, that's got to be wrong when society is making decisions like that, because it's very dangerous,
Thank goodness God does not treat us like that.
Thank goodness, yeah.
We'd all be in hell. So
The long-suffering patience of God is something I depend on every day.
Yes.
But no, I think you're right. That proximity effect, seeing people, like I was talking about my high school experience with my friend who was all over the board. Seeing that, I realized she was not in control of that. Others might come in and say, she just needs to get more responsibility. She just needs to, this, and this. And it's like obvious that she was struggling with something out of her control. As a child of the 80s, it was drilled into us, the whole AIDS epidemic. I mean, I was coming up in school while that was like, so that and DARE, right? Those were our two things, because these were the big thing. And I remember the fear around that. I remember all of that. And when you have a situation like that, when you have something that's still being understood, when the facts of the matter aren't, obvious or at play to everybody, you have people responding out of fear. When you have people responding out of fear, we do stupid stuff, or we scapegoat people, or these people are good, these people are bad. Right. And there's no understanding or nuance or whatever. And when we come in with these judgments that are devoid of both empathy and knowledge of a person's lived experience, that's when we're more likely to make fatal mistakes, And so, well, we're at the end of the chapter. We did it. So that was great.
Not bad.
I know. I'm doing all right. I really appreciate you two sharing your experience, and I'd love to do this again and expand on it more. So much important work is being done. It is frustrating. It is, I'm sure, demoralizing on some days. All that stuff, but it's so needed. It's an approach that's so necessary for what we're dealing with here. And it's only your little part of that picture, but it's really important. And I'm thankful for the time that you guys give to it, going out on the HRV, and for supervising. I'll put that in scare.
Thanks for supervising.
And that's creative for both of you. A pediatrician overseeing a meds first clinic, and a nurse becoming an activist based off of her proximity to seeing the suffering of AIDS patients in the 80s, right? Like, those are big events in life. And so I appreciate your time. Thank you. And let's do this again. And thanks for just sharing your stories.
Thank you.
All right. That's it for the long letter. And I'll see you next time.